5 years with a Super Reverb, this is what I found. Hey everyone, I'm Jack Fossett, and welcome to this 5-year review of the Fender Super Reverb. Seemed like a nice kind of bookend here. You've got 5 fingers, you've got 5 toes, you've actually got twice that many, but I'm already getting off topic. I've had this amp for 5 years. I got it almost exactly 5 years ago right now, and the reason that I remember that is because I got it literally days after my daughter Lucy was born, and she just turned 5. So this one is an easy one for me to remember, and it's always been a very special amp to me because of that. Now, I actually traded an AC30 for this amp. Believe it or not, it's the second time in my life I've traded an AC30 for a Super Reverb. Also back in 2009, believe it or not, I had an old AC30 CC2 that I traded for a Super Reverb. I was really excited to get it again because this is probably one of the greatest clean amps that you could ever play. It just sounds brilliant and beautiful, and particularly what I like is that it emphasizes the tonality of each of your guitars in such a lovely way. So you play a Stratocaster into it, you're talking clean tones, it's the way a Stratocaster should sound clean. If you play the 345 like I've got in this video, it's the way that should sound. If it's a Les Paul, if it's whatever, it's just the way the guitar should sound. You get so much of the guitar's natural nuances represented in the most beautiful way you can possibly imagine. Now, all that being said, this is not actually a perfect amplifier. This amplifier has some quirks, and it has some situations when it's really not the best choice. So we're going to talk about all that a little bit, but also just why this one is so inspiring. Now, one of the things that I've actually grown to love about it is there's pretty much just one way that I set it. It's a set it and forget it amp. And I think it sounds really great with pretty much any guitar when you set it up this way. Now, the way that I like to set it is with the treble at about 6, the mids at about 9, the bass somewhere between 3 and 4. That does depend on the guitar, but you're talking a minor tweak. Now, you'll hear in the video I have the reverb up a little bit high. I'm just kind of trying to emphasize it for you all because it is a super deep and lush reverb. I mean, I only have the reverb slightly over 3, and you can hear it very, very presently. This is just a super powerful, see what I did there? It's a super powerful reverb. Regardless, it's got a really lush sounding reverb, even better than other amps in the Blackface line from my experience. I think that the Super Reverb's reverb is particularly special. Now, two really important points about how to run this. One is to keep the bright switch off. I don't really know why this amp even has a bright switch. Maybe the vintage ones would be different, but the current production, this is a current production 65 reissue, it just is, I've never heard a guitar dark enough that it would need the bright switch on this amplifier. I also use the second input, the low gain input, and that's really important for responsiveness and for taming some of the EQ, because the EQ can be pretty spiky and pretty edgy. It's got that glassy sound to it. It's not as saggy as like a Fender Tweed would be. It's different than a Voxy kind of brightness, but it's still something that you might need to reel in a little bit. And also, and this is why situationally it might not be the best choice, even though it's such a great amp, it might not be the best choice for every gigging situation. I recently took this out. I was playing in a big CD release party for a kid named Michael Corletto, who's a country singer and writes some great music, and they brought me in to do the CD release party. Now, it was a big band on a big stage. There were 6 people in the band. 2 guitars, keys, also a pedal steel guitar, and bass and drums. I had my 335 and the Super Reverb, and I just wasn't coming through in the mix, and I had it loud enough. And then at one point when we were rehearsing, I let a chord ring out, not realizing that everyone else was doing a hard stop. As soon as they did the hard stop and I heard my chord ring out, I thought, that's where my sound is, that's where my volume is. It was all buried in lower mids. I switched guitars. I didn't wind up using the 335. This was at a rehearsal for the show. For the show, I switched over to mini humbuckers. I used a Les Paul Deluxe and a Firebird. And it worked much better because those are more slender pickups that have a little bit less of a bass response, or I should say they have less of the lower mid response than the humbuckers do. My point is that this amp isn't always going to be the best choice because it has such a big, powerful sound, and it has a lot of bass and lower mids, even with the bass turned down. So sometimes if you need an amp that's going to cut through in a big band setting, this one would not be my first choice, even though if I could only pick one amp to keep for the rest of my life, this one would definitely be like tops of the list. I don't know. I have like 3 or 4 amps that are kind of I couldn't decide. This is one of them. Now, the other thing that's a little bit quirky about it, and I've said this in other videos, is it's a little finicky with overdrives. Now, one of the things that I have done to remedy that is I have swapped 2 of the speakers. Relax, warrior for internet truth. I've got the mics on the 2 stock speakers. I've got the mics on the Jensens. Well, it's probably going to be some bleed through. How can we... Is there, though? I mean, actually, there might be a little bit of bleed through. I can't tell for sure, but I do have the mics on the Jensens, and take it easy and go do something better with your life. The Jensens are a bit raspy. Now, even though they have that great bell-like kind of clarity, so to speak, they don't necessarily take drives very well. One of the things I've noticed, and this is again kind of a blackface amp, modern blackface reissue amps in general, overdrives don't really sink into them like they do in other amps. You talk about Marshalls or Fender Tweeds or Supros or whatever you're talking about. A lot of those amps, when you hit it with an overdrive, the overdrive is kind of like injected into your tone. The best way I could describe it with the blackface amps and the Super is it's almost like the overdrive kind of bounces off your tone. You might get what I'm trying to say here. It doesn't integrate into your tone very well, and it can be kind of raspy and nasty sounding. Now, I swapped in 2 Eminence speakers years ago, and that definitely helped. I think there are other speakers you could get that would give you a better emphasis on drive. Also, just pairing it with the right overdrive makes a big difference. Now, I've actually built a custom pedal board just for the Super Reverb. I'm going to be doing a video on that soon, and there are a number of overdrives I would recommend, but just for today's purposes, you really can't go wrong with a TS9. That's always been my go-to pedal with this amp, and in fact, for a while when I was gigging with this amp, when I wasn't really in the mood to bring around a big pedal board setup, I would just take this amp with a TS9 with a 9-volt battery, and that was my whole rig. And as much as I love all kinds of different effects and all kinds of different guitars, I can honestly say that if all I could ever have for the rest of my life was a good Stratocaster, a Super Reverb, and a TS9, I would just be a totally happy person. Now, I'm going to share with you some samples of tone here. It's really going to be a lot of clean because that's what this amp just does so beautifully. I'm going to show you how the tremolo sounds and also play you some clips with the TS9 with both guitars so you can hear how really well that pedal integrates. But even with that, you'll notice I have the tone set way, way back to smooth out a little bit. It still sounds pretty bright and aggressive. But let us know, what do you think? Do you have a Super Reverb? Have you spent a lot of time with one? Do you have a vintage one? Do you have a Tone Master? I had a Tone Master one for a while. It was a great amp, certainly lighter, and in a live setting, I thought it really delivered the tone in a way that you didn't necessarily notice the difference. I did move on from that amp, mostly because I have questions about the longevity of the Tone Master series. I don't know if that's something that's kind of built to be replaced. And one of the things that I do like about old tube amps, even though they're heavy, is I feel like another 50 years from now, I'll still be able to get this one repaired and it'll still sound great. So, for whatever that's worth, for whatever my lack of knowledge about new digital technology is, I absolutely love this amp, and despite its idiosyncrasies and its quirkiness, I honestly can't recommend it enough because it's just such a beautiful sound for whatever guitar is going into it. I'm Jack Fossett. Stick around for some more tones. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Support me on Patreon. You can find a tip jar link below and all that kind of good stuff. Hope you enjoy the rest of the video.